Airport refuses to let black woman board. 10 minutes later, her private jet lands outside. Have you ever been in a situation where you were judged unfairly, just by the way you look? What if the person making those judgments had no idea who you really were, or the power you held? In today's story, we're diving into a shocking airport incident that starts with humiliation, but ends in a way no one could have ever imagined. Make sure to stay until the end, because trust me, the twist will leave you speechless. And before we jump in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of these incredible stories. Let's get started. The aroma of fresh coffee and the low murmur of travelers filled the air as Ava Johnson entered the bustling airport terminal. The morning sunlight poured through the high glass windows, illuminating her path to the check-in counter. She had been up since dawn, ensuring every detail for this trip was perfect. Her navy blazer and crisp white blouse reflected her polished demeanor, while the comfortable leather flats hinted at her practicality. With her carry-on bag in one hand and her phone in the other, Ava double-checked her flight details. Everything was in order. Flight 827, first-class ticket. Departure in 2 hours. A smile tugged at her lips. This wasn't her first time flying, but it was the first time she'd treated herself to a first-class experience. It was a small reward for the countless hours she had spent building her non-profit organization, which had finally turned a corner toward success. The first-class check-in line was shorter than she expected. A bright sign marked the counter, first class and priority check-in. Behind the counter stood a man in his 40s, his slicked-back hair glinting under the fluorescent lights. His name tag read Brian, and his posture, arms crossed, eyes scanning the line, suggested impatience. Ava stepped forward when it was her turn. "Good morning," she said warmly, sliding her ticket and ID across the counter. "I have a first-class ticket for flight 827. Brian picked up her documents with the air of someone handling something distasteful. His eyes flicked over her ticket, then up to her face, lingering for just a second too long. A faint sneer curled his lips. "First class?" he repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. "Yes," Ava said, her smile faltering just slightly. She could feel the weight of his gaze, dissecting her as though she didn't belong in this line. Brian tapped a few keys on his keyboard, his expression darkening. He looked back at her ticket, then at her again. "There seems to be a problem," he said, his voice colder now. "This ticket isn't valid for first class." Ava blinked, her brows knitting together. "That's impossible," she said, her tone still polite but firm. "I purchased this ticket weeks ago. It's confirmed." Brian's smirk grew. "Well, it doesn't look like it's valid now," he said, tilting the ticket slightly as though to emphasize its supposed flaws. "Could you please check again?" Ava asked, keeping her voice steady despite the irritation bubbling beneath her calm exterior. Brian sighed loudly, tapping the keyboard with exaggerated force. He glanced at her again, his eyes filled with condescension. "Are you sure you're in the right place? First class is for priority passengers." "I'm aware of that," Ava replied, her patience beginning to wear thin. "I bought a first-class ticket. I'm sure there's been some mistake." Brian's smirk didn't waver. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Look, ma'am, we've had issues with people trying to, how should I put this, upgrade themselves. If you can't afford first-class, economy check-in is down the hall." Ava froze, the words hitting her like a slap. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her now, their curiosity mingled with judgment. The prickle of unease she had felt earlier was now a full-fledged discomfort. "I don't think you understand," Ava said, her voice sharper now. "I paid for this ticket. I have the confirmation email if you'd like to see it." Brian straightened, his smirk fading into a look of feigned exasperation. "Security," he called over his shoulder, waving a nearby guard toward the counter. Ava's stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" she demanded. The guard approached, a tall man with a stern face. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking between Ava and Brian. Brian pointed at Ava. "This passenger is being disruptive and refusing to move to the appropriate line," he said. "That's not true," Ava shot back, her voice rising. "I've done nothing wrong. I simply want to board the flight I paid for." The guard's eyes lingered on her for a moment before he turned to Brian. "What's the issue with her ticket?" Brian shrugged, his smirk returning. "It's invalid. Probably bought it off some discount site. You know how these things go." Ava clenched her fists, her frustration boiling over. "That's a lie," she said, her voice steady despite the anger coursing through her. "I bought this ticket directly from the airline. Check it again." The guard hesitated, but Brian waved him off. "No need. We can't hold up the line for someone trying to scam their way into first class." The humiliation was suffocating now. Ava glanced around, seeing the whispers and stares from other passengers. She took a deep breath, willing herself to remain composed. "You'll regret this," she said softly, her voice firm with quiet resolve. Brian chuckled. "We'll see about that." As Ava turned to leave, she pulled out her phone, her fingers dialing a number she hadn't used in a while. Her calm demeanor didn't waver as the line connected. "I need a favor," she said into the phone, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Can you send the jet?" She hung up and walked away from the counter, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't look back, but the burning sting of humiliation stayed with her. What Brian didn't know was that this wasn't the end, far from it. In 10 minutes, everything was about to change. The faint murmur of voices surrounded Ava as she found a seat near the large windows overlooking the tarmac. The bustling terminal felt distant, a blur of movement and sound. She clutched her phone tightly, her hand trembling, not from fear, but from the simmering anger that had yet to subside. Her thumb hovered over her contacts. She took a deep breath, centering herself. It wasn't just about the insult she had endured. It was about the principle, about the blatant disrespect she faced simply because of her appearance. This was not the first time she had encountered such prejudice, but today, something inside her snapped. Ava tapped the screen and dialed. The phone rang twice before a familiar, warm voice answered on the other end. "Miss Johnson, is everything all right?" "It's not," Ava replied, her voice steady but firm. "I need the jet. Now." There was a pause, a slight intake of breath as the man on the other end processed her words. "Understood. Where are you?" She gave her location, her tone clipped but polite. "I need it here in 10 minutes. "It'll be there," the voice assured her. "Do you need anything else?" "No," she said, her voice softening slightly. "Just the jet. Thank you." As she ended the call, she leaned back in the hard plastic chair, her pulse gradually slowing. The rhythmic motion of planes taking off and landing outside offered a strange sense of calm. The storm inside her, however, was far from over. Brian, the gate agent, stood behind the counter, smugly processing the next passenger's ticket. He spared a glance in Ava's direction, watching as she sat alone by the window. A satisfied smirk played on his lips. He had dealt with her type before, people who thought money or confidence could mask their inadequacy. To him, Ava was no different. She was just another person trying to punch above her weight, and he had done what he believed was his job, maintain the order and exclusivity of first class. His attention snapped back to the line when a passenger cleared their throat impatiently. "Right," he muttered, returning to his task. The faint roar of jet engines drew Ava's attention to the tarmac. She straightened in her seat, her heart quickening as she saw a sleek private jet descending gracefully onto the runway. Its polished exterior gleamed in the sunlight, its elegance a stark contrast to the bustling chaos of the commercial terminal. Passengers nearby began to notice the jet as well. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some craned their necks to get a better look, while others speculated aloud about the VIP on board. Ava remained still, her gaze fixed on the plane as it taxied closer to the private gate. A dark SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the glass doors of the terminal. The chauffeur stepped out, his movements swift and precise. He scanned the area before making his way inside, heading directly toward Ava. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice low and respectful. "Your jet is ready." Ava stood, her movements deliberate. She felt the weight of every stare as the room seemed to quiet, curiosity overtaking the hum of conversation. She adjusted her blazer, lifted her chin, and nodded. "Thank you." The chauffeur escorted her toward the private gate, his presence commanding enough to part the crowd. Ava walked with purpose, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She didn't look back at the first-class counter, but she felt Brian's gaze on her, heavy and disbelieving. The SUV was waiting just outside, its engine idling. The chauffeur opened the door for Ava, and she slid inside, her expression composed but resolute. As the car drove across the tarmac toward the waiting jet, she allowed herself a small smile. This was not about showing off. It was about reclaiming her dignity, about reminding herself and others that she wouldn't be dismissed so easily. As the car came to a stop, the jet's staircase lowered. The crew stood at the top, waiting to greet her with warm smiles and professional courtesy. Ava stepped out of the car, the cool breeze brushing against her face as she ascended the steps. She turned one last time, her eyes scanning the airport terminal in the distance. From where she stood, she could see the commotion her departure had caused. A group of passengers crowded around the windows, their faces pressed against the glass. Somewhere in that crowd was Brian. Ava didn't wave, didn't acknowledge the crowd. She simply stepped into the jet, the door closing behind her. The interior was a sanctuary of luxury, cream leather seats, polished wood accents, and soft ambient lighting. Ava sank into one of the plush chairs, exhaling deeply. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, informing her that they would be airborne shortly. As the engines roared to life, Ava pulled out her phone again. This time she drafted a message to the airline's executive team, detailing the experience she had endured. Her fingers flew over the screen, each word chosen with precision. Before she hit send, she paused, her thoughts lingering on Brian. She didn't want revenge, not really. What she wanted was accountability, respect. Satisfied, she pressed send and placed her phone aside. The jet began to ascend, the ground falling away beneath her. As the city disappeared from view, Ava allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. This wasn't over, not yet. But for now she had reclaimed her peace, and that was a victory worth savoring. The hum of the jet engines settled into a low, soothing rhythm as Ava gazed out of the window. The world below had become a patchwork of green fields, gray roads, and tiny, glimmering lakes. Up here, in the serenity of the clouds, she felt a measure of calm returning, though the day's events still lingered heavily in her thoughts. She reached for the small cup of chamomile tea that the flight attendant had prepared for her. The gentle aroma was a stark contrast to the stale hostility she had faced back at the airport. Ava wrapped her hands around the warm cup, allowing its heat to seep into her palms, grounding her. She leaned back into the plush seat, replaying the encounter in her mind. The humiliation, the patronizing tone of the gate agent, the way he had dismissed her without a second thought, it all replayed with a sharp clarity. Ava didn't consider herself fragile, but this wasn't the first time she had been judged based on her appearance. It was, however, the first time she had decided not to let it slide. Her phone vibrated softly on the armrest, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a response to the email she had sent earlier. Ava opened it, her eyes scanning the words carefully. The message was from the airline's executive liaison, an assistant to the CEO. Subject: Urgent. Incident at gate check-in. Dear Miss Johnson, we are deeply sorry to hear about your experience. This behavior does not reflect the values or policies of our airline. Please be assured that we take these matters very seriously. The CEO would like to personally speak with you at your earliest convenience. Kindly let us know a time that works for you. Sincerely, Angela Carter, Executive Liaison, Atlantic Skies Airlines. Ava's lips pressed into a thin line. The response was polite and professional, but she could sense the urgency behind the formal tone. They knew the potential weight of her complaint, how a single story, especially one with merit, could spiral into a public relations nightmare. She considered her reply for a moment, then began typing. Brian leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone with an air of boredom. The line had dwindled, and the occasional glances from passengers in the terminal only fed his inflated sense of authority. But the murmur of conversations around him soon grew louder. Brian frowned, setting his phone down and craning his neck to see what was causing the commotion. Crowds of passengers were pressed against the large terminal windows, pointing toward the runway. He followed their gazes, his stomach dropping as he saw the private jet taxiing down the runway. The sleek aircraft gleamed in the sunlight, its luxury undeniable even from a distance. Brian felt a cold knot of dread twist in his chest. He didn't want to believe it, but something told him this was connected to the woman he had dismissed earlier. He brushed the thought aside. Surely it was a coincidence. But then, the murmurs grew louder, and a couple of passengers turned to him, their expressions curious, almost accusatory. "What's going on out there?" one of them asked. "Nothing to do with me," Brian muttered, his voice defensive. He busied himself with the computer, though his mind was racing. Back on the jet, Ava had finished drafting her reply. She had agreed to speak with the airline's CEO, but insisted the conversation wait until she reached her destination. She wasn't going to allow the incident to derail her plans entirely. As the flight attendant approached with a small tray of finger sandwiches, Ava thanked her quietly and settled back into her seat. She scrolled through her phone, reading through messages of encouragement from friends and colleagues. Most were unaware of what had transpired, but their positivity was a welcome balm. Then her phone vibrated again, a direct call from a number she didn't recognize. Ava hesitated before answering. "Hello, this is Ava Johnson," she said evenly. "Miss Johnson, this is Marcus Whitfield, CEO of Atlantic Skies Airlines. I wanted to personally extend my deepest apologies for what happened today." Ava's brow arched slightly at the directness of the call. She hadn't expected the CEO to reach out so quickly. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. I appreciate you taking the time to address this." "Of course," he said, his tone earnest. "I've already been briefed on the incident, and let me assure you, this is not the kind of experience we want any of our passengers to have, especially not in first class." Ava allowed a small pause before responding. "I understand that mistakes happen, Mr. Whitfield, but this didn't feel like a mistake. It felt deliberate." There was a silence on the other end, heavy but not uncomfortable. When Marcus spoke again, his voice carried a tone of determination. "I assure you, Miss Johnson, we are taking immediate action. The employee in question will be placed under review, and additional training will be implemented across all customer service departments." Ava nodded to herself, satisfied but not entirely appeased. "That's a start," she said. "But I'm not just looking for an apology. I want to see tangible changes in how you handle situations like this moving forward." "You have my word," Marcus said. "We'll be in touch to provide updates on the steps we're taking." Ava ended the call feeling a sense of cautious optimism. She had been heard, truly heard, and that was more than she could say for many similar situations in the past. As the jet descended toward its destination, Ava looked out the window once more, the clouds parting to reveal a vibrant cityscape below. She felt lighter now, her anger dissipating, replaced by a quiet resolve. The journey wasn't over. Not for her, not for the airline, and certainly not for Brian. But for the first time in a long time, Ava felt like change was within reach. She sipped the last of her tea, savoring the calm before the next chapter of her story began. The private jet touched down smoothly, its wheels kissing the runway with practiced grace. The sprawling city stretched out beyond the tarmac, a dazzling expanse of lights and skyscrapers against the fading evening sky. Ava remained seated as the jet taxied to the private terminal. Her mind, however, was far from still. She thought of the call with Marcus Whitfield, the airline CEO, and the promises he made. She had heard words like his before, polished, earnest, filled with the right intentions. Yet, too often they were fleeting. Words were easy, Change was harder. Ava resolved not to let this incident end with a simple apology. She would follow up, ensure the accountability promised to her wasn't lost in the shuffle of corporate bureaucracy. The pilot's voice broke through her thoughts. "Miss Johnson, we've arrived. A car is waiting to take you to your destination." Ava glanced out the window. A black town car gleamed under the golden lights of the private terminal, the chauffeur standing nearby, poised and professional. She exhaled, smoothing her blazer as she stood. With a measured step, she descended the jet's staircase, the cool evening air brushing her face. The town car was silent, save for the faint hum of the engine. Ava leaned her head against the window, watching the city unfold around her. The neon signs of bustling restaurants, the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement, the quiet hum of life moving forward. It all seemed surreal after the chaos of the morning. Her phone rested on her lap, and every few minutes it vibrated with incoming messages. Word of her experience had already begun to ripple outward. Friends and colleagues were reaching out, their messages ranging from shock to outrage. Ava read one such text from her close friend, Simone. "Are you okay? I heard what happened. I'm furious for you. Let me know if you need anything." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed a brief reply. "I'm okay. Thanks for checking in. I'll call you later." She appreciated the support but wasn't ready to dive into long conversations just yet. For now, she needed to process everything in her own time. The car pulled up to a boutique hotel nestled in a quiet corner of the city. Ava had chosen it for its understated elegance, a haven away from the bustling downtown. The doorman greeted her warmly, opening the car door with a small bow. "Welcome, Miss Johnson," he said with a kind smile. "We've been expecting you." "Thank you," Ava replied, her voice steady but tinged with weariness. Inside, the hotel lobby exuded calm. Soft lighting bathed the room in a golden glow, and the gentle scent of lavender lingered in the air. Ava checked in quickly, the staff efficient and discreet. Within minutes, she was in her suite, the door closing behind her with a quiet click. She dropped her bag onto the armchair by the window and slipped off her shoes, letting her bare feet sink into the plush carpet. The room was serene, a cozy sitting area, a large bed dressed in crisp white linens, and a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Ava poured herself a glass of water from the carafe on the table and sat by the window. The city lights twinkled like distant stars, and for the first time all day, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. The knot of tension in her chest began to loosen. But the peace was short-lived. Her phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. She hesitated before picking it up, her curiosity outweighing her fatigue. The email was from Angela Carter, the executive liaison who had responded to her initial complaint. Ava opened it, her eyes scanning the screen. Subject: Update on today's incident. Dear Miss Johnson, I wanted to provide you with an update on the situation you brought to our attention. The employee involved has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Additionally, we are initiating a review of our customer service protocols and sensitivity training for all frontline staff. Our CEO has also instructed us to expedite the resolution of this matter and ensure that such incidents are prevented in the future. We remain committed to providing you with updates as we move forward. Sincerely, Angela Carter, Executive Liaison, Atlantic Skies Airlines. Ava placed the phone down, her emotions conflicted. The steps they were taking were a start, but she knew how corporate procedures could often feel performative. Would this truly lead to meaningful change, or would it be swept under the rug once the attention waned? She leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the skyline. The day's events replayed in her mind, the smirks, the dismissiveness, the humiliation. She thought of Brian, the gate agent who had treated her as though she didn't belong, and the security guard who had loomed over her without question. This wasn't just about her, she realized. It was about everyone who had ever faced the same treatment, but lacked the resources or platform to push back. Ava knew she had a responsibility now, to make sure the accountability promised to her would set a precedent. As the hours stretched into the night, Ava's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from her mentor, Grace Harper, a retired civil rights lawyer who had guided Ava through countless challenges in her career. "Ava," Grace's voice was warm but firm. "I heard what happened. How are you holding up?" Ava sighed, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly at the familiar voice. "I'm okay, Grace. Tired, but okay." "I'm proud of you for standing your ground," Grace said. "But remember, this is bigger than you. What's your plan?" Ava hesitated. "I'm not sure yet. They've already reached out, promised changes, but you know how these things go." Grace chuckled softly. "Oh, I know. Promises are easy. Follow through is harder. But you have something powerful on your side. Their fear of consequences. Use it." Ava smiled faintly. "You always know what to say." "I know you, Ava," Grace said. "You're not the type to let this slide. Call me if you need help, and don't forget, you're not alone in this." The call ended, leaving Ava with a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for fairness, for respect, for the countless others who deserved better. Ava finally rose from her seat and prepared for bed. As she slipped under the soft covers, her mind began to quiet. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing for certain. The events of today wouldn't be the end of the story. Tomorrow she would begin the next chapter, and this time she would make sure the world was paying attention. Morning came softly, sunlight filtering through the sheer curtains of Ava's hotel room. The faint sounds of the city waking up, car horns, distant chatter, the rumble of delivery trucks, seeped into the quiet sanctuary of her suite. Ava stirred, reluctant to leave the comfort of the plush bed, but the weight of the previous day settled over her like a persistent shadow. She sat up, her bare feet brushing the cool carpet, and stretched, trying to shake the lingering exhaustion. Despite the luxurious surroundings, sleep had been elusive. Her mind had raced through the night, replaying every word, every look, every injustice she had faced at the airport. Today, though, was a new day, and Ava intended to meet it with clarity and purpose. Downstairs in the hotel's dining room, the air was filled with the enticing aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries. Ava selected a small table by the window, the soft morning light making the polished silverware gleam. She ordered her meal, a simple omelet with fruit and toast, and sipped her coffee as she waited. Her phone rested on the table, the screen dark. Ava resisted the urge to check her emails or messages immediately. For now, she needed this moment of peace, a chance to center herself before diving back into the whirlwind. She gazed out at the city, watching people hurry along the sidewalks, each immersed in their own lives. Her thoughts drifted to her mentor's words from the night before. "This is bigger than you." Grace was right, of course. What happened to Ava wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern, one that countless others faced daily. Ava's platform gave her an opportunity and a responsibility to challenge that pattern, to demand better. Her breakfast arrived, the server placing the plates in front of her with a polite nod. Ava thanked him quietly and took a bite of her omelet, the familiar flavors grounding her. As she ate, she mentally outlined her next steps. She would follow up with the airline, not just as a customer seeking resolution, but as an advocate for meaningful change. Back in her suite, Ava settled into the desk chair, her laptop open in front of her. The email from Angela Carter sat in her inbox, waiting for a reply. Ava reread it, her eyes lingering on the phrase, sensitivity training. It sounded good on paper, but she wondered how effective it would truly be. Too often these measures were performative, a box to check rather than a genuine effort to foster understanding and respect. Ava began typing her response. Her words were measured but firm, conveying both her appreciation for the airline's swift acknowledgement of the issue and her insistence on tangible actions. Subject: Update on today's incident. Dear Miss Carter, thank you for the update and for your prompt attention to this matter. While I appreciate the steps being taken, I would like to discuss how we can ensure these changes are lasting and impactful. Sensitivity training is a good start, but I believe a broader approach is needed to address systemic issues within your organization. I'd be happy to share further thoughts on this during our upcoming call. Let me know a time that works best. Sincerely, Ava Johnson. She read over the email twice before hitting send. Her fingers lingered on the keyboard for a moment, her mind already racing ahead to the conversation that would follow. That afternoon, Ava received a message from her colleague Simone. It was a link to an article on a popular news site, accompanied by a brief text. Looks like the story's getting out. Ava clicked the link. The article detailed her experience at the airport, recounting the incident with the gate agent and the private jet's dramatic arrival. Though her name wasn't mentioned, the details were unmistakable. The headline read, "Luxury jet highlights alleged racial discrimination at major airline." Her chest tightened as she read the piece. It was factual and restrained, but the comments section was a different story. Supportive messages were interspersed with vitriol, strangers debating whether her experience constituted discrimination or if she was playing the victim. Ava set her phone down, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't naive. She had anticipated some backlash, but seeing the polarized reactions in real time was unnerving. She reminded herself of Grace's advice. "You're not alone in this." By late afternoon, Ava was preparing for her call with Marcus Whitfield. She had jotted down key points she wanted to address, ensuring her thoughts were organized. As the time approached, she felt a mixture of resolve and apprehension. This wasn't just about her experience. It was about making sure the airline understood the broader implications of what had happened. The call began promptly, Marcus's voice warm and apologetic. "Miss Johnson, thank you for taking the time to speak with me again. I want to reiterate how deeply sorry I am for what you endured." "I appreciate that, Mr. Whitfield," Ava replied. "But I think we both know an apology alone isn't enough." "You're absolutely right," he said. "We've already begun reviewing our policies and we're working with external consultants to implement comprehensive diversity and sensitivity training." Ava didn't let the polished response deter her. Training is a good start, but it needs to be part of a larger culture shift. That means accountability, transparency, and a commitment to listening to your customers, especially those who've experienced discrimination. Marcus hesitated, then said, "I couldn't agree more. What would you propose?" Ava outlined her ideas: a customer advisory board to provide feedback on inclusivity, an anonymous reporting system for employees and customers, and regular audits to measure progress. She spoke with conviction, drawing from her years of advocacy work. By the end of the call, Marcus sounded genuinely impressed. "Miss Johnson, your insights are invaluable. I'd like to invite you to join our advisory panel as we move forward. Your perspective would be a tremendous asset." Ava considered the offer, her heart pounding. This was an opportunity to influence real change, but it also came with the weight of responsibility. "I'll think about it," she said. "For now, I'm focused on ensuring this specific incident is resolved appropriately." "Of course," Marcus said. "We'll be in touch with updates." That evening, Ava returned to her seat by the hotel window, the city glowing softly in the twilight. The day had been draining but productive. She felt the stirrings of hope, not just for herself, but for others who might one day benefit from the ripples of her actions. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ava closed her eyes and let the quiet settle around her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she was ready to face it. For now, that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and Ava's experience at the airport continued to ripple outward. The airline followed through on its promises, issuing a public statement about its commitment to inclusivity and customer respect. Sensitivity training was implemented across all departments, and the company began an internal review of its hiring and promotion practices. The gate agent, Brian, was terminated following the investigation, a clear signal that such behavior would no longer be tolerated. Ava, however, wasn't interested in triumph over a single individual. Her focus had always been on the larger picture, on creating a system that valued every customer equally, regardless of appearance or background. She accepted Marcus Whitfield's invitation to join the advisory panel, her voice becoming a driving force for meaningful change within the company. Her work with the airline expanded beyond policy recommendations. Ava facilitated discussions with employees at all levels, sharing her story and encouraging them to reflect on their own biases. She worked closely with other panel members to ensure the company's efforts were more than symbolic gestures, and her efforts inspired other organizations to take similar steps toward accountability and equity. In her own life, Ava found herself transformed by the experience. While the sting of humiliation had been sharp, it also reignited her passion for advocacy. She spoke about the incident at conferences and workshops, weaving it into her broader mission of dismantling systemic prejudice. Her non-profit organization saw an influx of support, with many drawn to her unwavering resolve and determination to turn adversity into action. The incident became a chapter in her story, but it didn't define her. Ava was far more than a moment of injustice. She was a woman of strength, vision, and grace who refused to accept the status quo. Months later, Ava returned to the same airport on a trip for her nonprofit. As she walked through the terminal, she couldn't help but glance at the first-class counter. It had changed. New faces behind the desk, a different energy in the air. The subtle changes reflected the shifts she had helped inspire. This time, her journey was seamless. The staff greeted her warmly, processed her ticket with efficiency and respect, and wished her a pleasant flight. As she boarded the plane, Ava felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not for herself, but for the progress that had been made. As the plane ascended into the sky, Ava gazed out of the window, the world below shrinking into a blur of lights and landscapes. She had learned a powerful lesson through her journey. Change doesn't happen in a single moment, but in the countless steps taken afterward. It requires courage, persistence, and the belief that even the smallest actions can create ripples that reach far beyond what we can see. Ava closed her eyes, a faint smile on her lips. Her journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever lay ahead. After all, she had already proven that one voice, when used with purpose, could make all the difference. And just like that, Ava's story reminds us that respect and integrity should never be based on appearances. What started as an act of humiliation turned into a powerful lesson not just for the airline, but for everyone watching. If this story inspired you or made you think differently, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoy stories like these, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.